I'll sing a song, a rollicky song as I roll along my way, with a hey-derry-die and a derry-die-do and a riddle-de-diddle-de-day. Hark to the tale of Robin Hood and of his merry men. His like you are not like to see in all the world again. His bow was long, his arm was strong, and his heart was good and true. Well did he fight to gain the right, and so I pray may you.
The stories of Robin Hood as they come down to us today emerge out of the tradition of ballads and songs that wandering minstrels might have sung as they traversed the length and breadth of England. And so it is appropriate that 1952's The Story of Robin Hood and His Merry Men opens and closes with a similar device, utilizing the figure of Alan a Dale as our balladeer, singing to us to welcome us into the world of Robin Hood. And throughout the movie, he re-emerges to fill us in on Robin's exploits. It's an appropriate device and one that the movie does quite well. Walt Disney would revisit this trick the second time they made a Robin Hood movie, only in that case, Alan a Dale took the form of a cartoon rooster. This is Splitting Arrows, where we take a look at the Robin Hood films chronologically and think about what they mean to us today. For this episode, I've been joined once again by Richard Hopkins-Lutz and by special guest Mike Nichols. I won't go into a lot more background detail right now, as this is already one of our longer episodes. It turned out that we had quite a lot to say. I will give a slight warning. Towards the very end of the episode, we do very briefly touch upon some darker aspects, not so much of the story, but of the real lives of the actors who made this movie. And while we don't go into great lengths or details, please know that if you're suffering, help is available to you. If you live in the United States, please remember that the National Suicide Prevention Lifeline is always available to you at the number 800-273-8255. But please do now enjoy our discussion of the story of Robin Hood and his merry men. Welcome to Into the Greenwood, Splitting Arrows, where we're going to watch the story of Robin Hood and his merry men from 1952. Joining me this evening is Richard Hopkins-Lutz again, and special guest Mike Nichols, author of the Gospel of Friar Tuck, and somebody who does his own podcasting and film review series. So I'm expecting some very expert opinions about this film. Mike?
Yeah, thank you. If anyone cares, I'm part of the Second Day Film Podcast, where we review TVs and movies. I am a huge Robin Hood nerd, and I'm a big fan of this podcast, so I'm really thankful that I get to actually come on this podcast and talk about the two things I love best, Robin Hood and movies. So thank you so much for having me.
Being a big fan of Robin Hood and movies, you are uniquely positioned right now in that you're the only one of us who has already seen this movie before.
Or heard of it.
Disney's unknown Robin Hood movie. Everyone knows about the Fox cartoon, but this is actually the first time they ever did Robin Hood.
Mm-hmm. This is the first time they did Robin Hood, and one of the first times they made a live-action movie. Disney really is known for its animation, and that was really the case from the get-go, getting onto the scene with Snow White and making animated features. Their first live-action film was Treasure Island in 1950. It was a huge success. It starred Robert Newton as Long John Silver. Very notable performance because our understanding of the gruff Midland accent that pirates use
totally comes from his performance. The reason Talk Like a Pirate Day exists is because of Robert Newton's performance in Treasure Island. The film was so successful, they kept going forward with live action films, and they decided their second bet would be to stick with English literature, and they went with the story of Robin Hood, starring Richard Todd as Robin Hood, an actor who had a pretty distinguished film career, was also a veteran of D-Day, serving with the 7th Light Infantry Parachute Battalion, according to Wikipedia at least. The film also has Joan Rice as Maid Marian, Peter Finch as the Sheriff of Nottingham, James Hayter as Friar Tuck, James Robertson Justice as Little John, which I think is a fantastic name, James Robertson Justice, Martilda Hunt as Queen Eleanor of Aquitaine, Hubert Gregg as Prince John, Elliot Hayes as Alan Adale, Anthony Eustrel as the Archbishop of Canterbury, Patrick Burr as King Richard, Anthony Forwood as Will Scarlet, Bill Owen as Will Stutely, which excites me because I'm a fan of Will Stutely, one of those lesser-known merry men. Excited to see him show up in a movie. And it was directed by Ken Anakin and written by Lawrence Edward Watkin. Anything you want to add there, Mike?
I love this Robin Hood. I think it's actually, in terms of film, I think it does one of the best jobs of not only giving you all the different merry men, but also just giving you a classic kind of traditional take on Robin Hood. It feels very much like it's kind of redoing like Errol Flynn's version of pretty simple, straightforward, classic stories. The very traditional tales of Robin Hood and Little John meeting on the bridge, Robin Hood and Friar Tuck going across the stream. These are just the kind of basic kind of core elements that are so, primal to the Robin Hood mythology. And you kind of get all those core traditional things here. It's also just very Disney. So like if you kind of remember those old 1950s Disney movies like Treasure Island, stuff like that, like you'll definitely find this is Disney trying to figure out what is our live action equation and film formula going to be. This is the early roots of that for Disney, and you can kind of see a lot of Walt Disney's like hand in it, as well as some of the ways that he thinks about making movies and retelling things in a traditional way that are still fresh but still very much to formula. You'll see a lot of that in this movie. If you're interested in the history of Disney as a company, this is a movie definitely to take note of.
One of the comments that came up a lot with the 1938 Adventures of Robin Hood with Errol Flynn is how storybook it feels. And we discussed that some in the Splitting Arrows episode where we covered that film. And that felt very true. That rang true. It's a very lush film. It's very colorful. It does contain a lot of those classic elements that originally come from the Robin Hood ballads, those familiar episodes like you were just mentioning. So that's one of the things that I am most curious about with this film, is how much it also might feel like a storybook version of the movie on film, and how, one might compare this storybook as opposed to the 38 film as a storybook for Robin Hood on film. So that's the kind of comparison that I think is going to be in my mind going forward.
It will definitely have that. I think the movie, and I haven't seen this movie in years, but I think it opens up with like the traditional a book opening up in the screen type thing, and then illustrations kind of meld into the actual the shot itself. So it is definitely very much Disney trying to bring a storybook to life.
Disney loved that technique back in the day.
Yeah, they did.
I'm kind of looking forward to that. That's actually a thing, because like you were saying, the 38 Flynn film did have that storybook quality, and that was definitely Disney's signature trope back when they were first starting, because they were used to doing animated storybook type movies and transitioning to fairy tales and storybooks. And so I think it'll be interesting. I'm also kind of I feel it's kind of nice to get back to actual Robin Hood, since the last 3 films were all child of Robin Hood or Robin Hood's boyhood friend or whatever. I don't know. It feels almost kind of like we're turning the clock back and going back to this basal story, which will be nice. I'm curious to see how the Merry Men are done, since thus far, actually, we've seen varying performances of different quality on the Merry Men, and how much screen time they get. And while the Flynn film, while 38 Robin Hood has Merry Men in it and has some good development in there, especially with Much to Miller's Son. I think for me the MVP film for that is Bandits of Sherwood Forest, the one where it's Alan Hale's last performance. Was it
Rogues of Sherwood Forest?
Rogues of Sherwood Forest. Sorry, the titles are so similar.
Right.
Which had the old gang getting back together, and if you haven't, I don't know if you've seen that one, Mike, but that one is 100% worth it just to see the performances around these older merry men and the really good chemistry that the actors had on stage. So I'm hopeful for something, because I will say that Disney, even back in the 50s, did a decent job of casting. They usually picked decent actors.
I will say that I think Richard Todd, even if his movie isn't the best Robin Hood movie, in terms of picking a guy to play Robin Hood, he's actually a pretty awesome choice. He's a well-trained actor. Of all the Robin Hood actors, I think Richard Todd actually may have the most impressive when it comes to a military career. Let me just give you a quick history of who Richard Todd was in the Army, if I could. So on D-Day, Richard Todd, his unit was the actual, the first Allied unit to set boot on the ground in Normandy on D-Day. He was one of those specially trained guys. So he went over for Operation Tonga, which was, the British units that went over in the gliders early in the morning, well before the beach landings on Omaha and Utah, and even well before paratroopers, like in Band of Brothers and Easy Company, even before they landed. Richard Todd was one of the first Allied soldiers to start the Battle of Normandy. And actually he was, I think this is his claim, he was the first Irishman to set boots on the ground in Normandy on D-Day. And they had a pretty intense fight taking a bridge. This was all eventually portrayed in the famous World War II classic film, The Longest Day, which is absolutely one of the best World War II movies. You don't check it out if you like World War II. But Richard Todd is in that movie. And in that movie, he plays his commanding officer that he had on that day. And I think there is an actor who does play him, and he turns and says a line to, himself. Yeah, Richard Todd was no joke. He was very athletically skilled. He was a decorated and respected war hero. So I think other Robin Hood actors have had military services, but I don't think any of them have first guy to set his boots on the ground in Normandy on D-Day.
That's some cred.
That is some cred, and that's wow, that's amazing. It's always fascinating, when you learn about an actor from that generation and what they did during the war. Finding out what Christopher Lee did during the war, or finding out David Niven, who was always played these very foppish characters, was a commando who won 2 Victoria Crosses. And it sounds like Richard Todd, again, that kind of, he has this background in the war. And I'm hopeful, from what you're telling me, I don't know if this is going to be the case. I'm hopeful that we'll see some physicality on the character, because that was a thing that we saw in the Douglas Fairbanks one, especially. He was a very physical actor. He brought just a physical force to the part, just through his. He always seemed like this coiled spring throughout the whole movie, and then when he burst into action, it was fast and very, very powerful. Yeah, it was very electric. And Errol Flynn also brought a lot of physicality to the part, because he's jumping around, and you see it in the sword fight with Basil Rathbone at the end, just that physicality of the actors. And so I'm hopeful that Richard Todd brings some of that, and they let him shine, because it's always a physical performance of a character. It's always best when the actor himself can carry off the physicality, and it's not just always cut to a stuntman whenever whenever they need something physical. This is why, for instance, the not to divert too much. For instance, the John Wick movies are such good action movies because it's Keanu Reeves doing the action, most of it anyway. And again, Errol Flynn and Douglas Fairbanks, it was the same thing. They were doing most of these stunts, and so even in scenes where they're not doing stunts, there's that physical sense of it. You can feel the difference in the actor and their performance in general. It sounds like Richard Todd is a good candidate for that. I don't know if this is, I may be building all this up and then, it's total disappointment.
Yeah, but, no, he trips during the archery contest. It's super embarrassing. No, he's an excellent, he does an excellent job of, just characterizing the physical heroics of the character of Robin, like jumping on horses, like grabbing trees. He does a good job. I think he did all of his own stunts for this movie. Another thing I'll say about him is like that physicality and that charm and even that World War II experience he had. This was why Ian Fleming, the author of the James Bond novels, Ian Fleming wanted Richard Todd as his first choice for James Bond.
Oh, wow.
So this guy, I think he was an Oscar-nominated actor as well for a couple other films he did. But he was a very respected, charming British star, and he did have like a lot of physicality to him. And he kind of just brings that effortless authority to the role of Robin. But the fact that he doesn't play Robin as a lord, Robin is just a common yeoman in this version, it just kind of in some ways makes his Robin a little bit more seeming resilient than the others. Like this is a kid who didn't have much and is just still a real champion of the people in his own right. So there's a lot that Richard Todd brings to this role that's very likable right off the bat.
I'm really looking forward to that. A consistent complaint for the last 3 or 4 Robin Hood movies was how lackluster the leading man has been. Not just in terms of their physicality, but also in terms of how flat their delivery was, a certain lack of charisma. So it will be really nice to see a good, dynamic, interesting Robin Hood again.
Thaddeus, is it okay if we mention the blog spot for this movie? I know before.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, so we should just tell everyone there is a great website that's just totally dedicated to this film. There's a guy who runs it. He's done so much research. He's got if you're interested in learning more about this film, which actually there's a lot of really cool Disney history in the story of how this film got made. And there's someone who's made a whole website about it. It's disneysrobin.blogspot.com. If you want to check that out, this guy was the original person who should have been the guest on here, not me, because this guy is just a total expert. And Thaddeus and I, we've been chatting before about this, and I told him, I was like, you got to get that guy on. He would be the perfect guy to talk about this Robin Hood movie. And sadly, I don't think he was able to make it tonight. So you're stuck with me instead. Sorry. But if you want to check out more about this movie, and you definitely just want to learn more about how this movie ties into the history of Disney's live action films and Walt Disney's mindset on it in the 1950s, please go check out his website. I'm sure it'll get linked somewhere in here. But yeah.
That is amazing. A niche fan site for a unknown Disney film. That is great. And I love the internet sometimes.
Like this guy goes deep into it. Like, I mean, I think of myself as a Robin Hood fan and a very big Robin Hood nerd. And then just kind of through the process of like writing this Robin Hood play and, meeting people like you, Thaddeus, and like meeting other people online on Twitter and stuff, like, oh no, like I'm not even close to like where I should be in my knowledge of Robin Hood. There's people who just like all they do on Instagram is just dress up as Robin Hood. There's people who like have entire niche websites devoted to like one aspect or one member of the merry band or something. And this is one of those like impressively deep websites that we would recommend checking out if you want to learn more about this story and this film.
Yeah, I'll make sure to include a link to it in the episode description.
This guy's got over 800 posts on this website.
Yeah, it's thorough. He has a Facebook page for it also.
He's found like the posters they didn't even use where they're like, oh yeah, like that's not one of those we're going to use, throw that away. And somehow he has them. And it's just like so impressive that someone could care this much about a film that no one knows about.
I'll need to look up what those posters are, because I have to say I'm not a fan of the poster that they went with, at least the one that I see all the time, with Richard Todd wearing his Robin Hood hat and being bare-chested. Looks like some kind of Robin Hood Tarzan, mashup.
They're trying to get the teenage audience. It's
Yeah.
the Robin Hood Beach movie you never knew you wanted.
I'd watch that. I'd watch a Robin Hood Beach movie.
Robin Hood Beach
Robin
movie?
Hood Movie would be hysterical.
Especially if they stop for like go-go dancing. It's a
You know,
go-go
there's
dance contest with archery.
Right. Well, there's got to be a scene where some people are on the beach batting the beach ball back and forth, and then like the sheriff comes up and one of his men like shoots the beach ball with a crossbow, puts an end to their good times.
Him and Little John are challenging each other on surfboards on the wave, and they're staff while they're surfing. Robin gets knocked off, and Little John goes, "Far out, man!" Like, exactly.
The movie.
The
movie's writing itself.
I think we just determined what our April Fool's prank should be, which is an audio drama version of this.
Yeah.
That's a fun idea.
And Timothy Chalamet will star.
So a couple other trivia things I wanted to mention. You brought up Richard Todd as an Oscar-winning performer. The Sheriff of Nottingham, Peter Finch, also won an Oscar, and notably won it posthumously. After this film, he won it for 1976's film Network for playing Howard Beale, the anchorman in that film. And he was the first actor to win an Academy Award posthumously. The other thing I especially wanted to mention in regards to this movie, though, the story of Robin Hood, is that it was filmed in England. And I'm curious to see how that compares with all of the Southern California scenery that we've been seeing for the last few movies. It is notable for even having had a few shots taken in Sherwood Forest itself.
Wow. Yeah, because I tell you, some of those Southern California, like the Sherwood Forest with 3 trees and some shrubs.
Yeah,
looks like a public park.
I have visited England and I have lived in Southern California. The two places do not look very similar. So I am excited to see how this film looks. I think this was a good amount of background. I feel much more pumped up for the movie than I was beforehand. Are you guys ready?
My mind, body, and soul are ready.
Okay. We're going to pause our recording. We're going to watch the film, and then we'll come back, and it will no longer be spoiler-free. See you after the film.
I've tidings to tell, and new songs as well, of the wonders I've seen far and wide. But if you'd hear a tale from Alan a Dale, you must first drop a penny inside. Oh, Robin, who was called Fitzooth, is dwelling in the wood. His coat is changed to Lincoln green, his name to Robin Hood.
No, sorry, I want to open with a comment, and that is, how in a fair and just world is this movie so under the radar?
Thank you so much for saying that.
I mean, seriously, this movie was just, it was great. It was really good. It was like from start to finish. It's only 83 minutes, but it feels longer in a good way, in that it doesn't feel rushed. None of the scenes feel compressed. There's not a whole lot of fat to trim, but the performances are excellent. The costumes are great. The sets are lavish. The matte paintings are they're well done. There's some very different characterizations on a few of the characters, but also you can see where they took some definite inspirations from other women. I genuinely enjoyed this movie. This was really good, and anybody listening to this, go watch this movie. Like, genuinely.
I feel less enthusiastic about it than you do.
That's fair. You're allowed to.
There were definitely aspects of the movie I enjoyed. I thought the matte paintings were really blatantly obvious in terms of when they were matte paintings. I mentioned earlier about how it was shot in England and how they even had some shots in Sherwood Forest, and you could tell there was some really great forest shots. Mm-hmm. But a lot of the rest of the film, including when they were in their like Sherwood Forest hideaway, it felt like I was in like a Disneyland park. It looked really fake to me.
I could see that. I felt that the matte paintings were fine for the time. I mean, this is early 50s. There are better matte painting movies out there, but I don't know what the budget of this was, but given that it's an early Walt Disney, I don't know. I felt the matte paintings were good. I thought they were well done. But, hey, all things all different kinds. But no, I thought overall I really enjoyed the movie in general though. I thought Richard Todd was he was charismatic, but not not insufferable with himself.
Definitely the best Robin we've gotten since Errol Flynn.
Yes, agreed. He had genuine chemistry with Joan Rice, and as Maid Marian. You felt like so. One of the things is that this is a different version of the story from the other movie versions that we've seen. Here, Robin is common born. He's not nobility.
Definitely wanted to hit on that point.
Yeah,
Robin Hood is not a noble in this.
And he's a childhood friend of Maid Marian. They know each other from before the movie, and have a rapport and this kind of flirtiness that feels good, feels natural. The change to the archery contest, placing it before he becomes Robin Hood, and it's not Robin who splits the arrow; it's his father. That was an interesting change, but it worked for me. I like that just to kind of play with the story a little bit. A lot of the same beats, but in different places and everything. Mike, we're talking and everything, and I don't want to just sit here and blab about this.
So yeah, Mike, you've seen the movie before. You were already a fan of the movie. Does it live up to your remembrances?
Yeah, I grew up with this movie on VHS. My parents got us. There was like a special Disney VHS release that they did. I want to say in like the late 80s, early 90s, where they re-released like a lot of their kind of classic live actions. So the Treasure Island film with Robert Newton, sorry, The Parent Trap with Haley Mills, The 2000 Leagues Under the Sea with Kirk Douglas, and then this story of Robin Hood that was part of it. So I've seen this as a kid, and I've seen the Errol Flynn movie first, and I think because I was a kid, this movie came second in my mind, and I was like, oh yeah, this hits all the same beats. This is a Robin Hood movie. It counts. As a kid thinks about it in terms of like, yeah, this is what's supposed to happen in the story. And yeah, I think this movie is very well written in terms of trying to cram as many different Robin Hood mythology stories as you can into one story that's this short. Like, I think you brought up, like, this is actually a pretty quick movie. But they got in, Robin's a yeoman. There's an archery contest. An arrow gets split. We have a new sheriff. There's a crusade. He meets Little John, and they have the traditional meeting. He meets Friar Tuck, and they have the traditional meeting. Alan Adale, Much the Miller's Son, Will Stutely, Will Scathlock. You've got everyone in there, and they do it in such a quick pacing that even though the movie tends to, I think, in some ways be very, and I think this is what you were going through for that, it's very formulaic in a lot of ways. Like, Robin and Little John meet and fight kind of because they're Robin and Little John, not because the characters have a lot of depth to why they would do this. But yet the charm of the actors kind of follows it along. And same with Robin and Marian. There's a little bit of melodramatic, oh, Robin, will I ever see you again? God willing. And the kid, yeah, it's a little cheesy. It's the 1950s, formulaic. Hey, they're Robin, they're Marian, they're supposed to be in love. Make them in love. Boom, there we go. We got a movie. And in some ways, those kind of moments are a little cheapened by the formulaic. Disney has to get the movie they want to get. But like, if you really step back and look at the writing of what they accomplished with this movie, it's kind of impressive. Given, and this is kind of what you brought up earlier, this is coming along a lot of slew Robin Hood movies where it's like, oh, let's do like a rip-off of Errol Flynn with the kids, or let's do The Son of Robin Hood or The Bandit of Sherwood. Like, all these, like, we're doing Robin Hood but not really doing Robin Hood movies, and this just, like, cuts the crap, as Jerry Seinfeld would say. And it just gets us back to the core of, we're back to Robin Hood. let's do the story, let's do the legend, let's do the traditional tales, and let's have a lot of charm and fun and kind of fun innocence with it. This kind of reminds me of kind of the way they did the Avengers movies in some way, where the characters are like, oh, hey, like where Alan Adale is like, don't leave me, like everyone else is getting carried along, and hey, like you could totally see Ant-Man saying that to Hulk or something. Like there's a lot of Disney kind of old school charm in this, and I think it actually does work really well with the kind of the spirit of Robin Hood.
Well, one of the things is that, and this is the thing that I've always known that I always appreciate is like the little things when Richard reveals himself, you know, at the end. But like one of the things you see, like Friar Tuck, his staff is like slipping through his fingers as he's like in shock, you know, and everything, and there's lots of little things like that, little performances, even stuff just in the background. It's really well done. It adds to the feel. It adds to the authentic feeling of the characters. Like these aren't just people who are standing there delivering lines, which is one of my big problems with some of the kind of slew movies that we've been watching. God, watching Cornell Wilde deliver his lines is like having your teeth ground down sometimes because he's so just one note. Whereas Richard Todd, I felt really was trying, was doing a good job of emoting and bringing different moods and different performance aspects.
Speaking of there being lots of little touches that you notice in terms of the filmmaking, there were also lots of nice little touches that relate to the Robin Hood ballads that they were pulling from really heavily.
Yeah.
So,
yes.
Mike mentioned, and I mentioned earlier before we watched the film, how Will Stutely is a character in this one who normally gets left out. And there are a couple early ballads where he is mentioned. There's one that's even called The Rescue of Will Stutely. And they do a version of that ballad in this movie. And in that ballad, Robin goes disguised as a palmer, somebody returned from the Crusades to be able to get close enough to Will Stutely to save him. And they did that in this movie. They had Robin Hood be disguised. His disguise was that of a palmer. And they don't draw attention to it. You have to you have to know that's what the costume even is to be able to pick that out. And that was a really nice detail, both in terms of the story building and the world, in terms of what kind of disguise he might have, but also a really solid connection to the source material there that most people wouldn't even be aware of.
So I have to tell everyone, and Thaddeus, I watched you very carefully at this moment. When we were watching the movie, and all of a sudden, I knew when Will Stutely was going to be brought on screen. I think I actually like unmuted the Zoom, and I was like, "Hey, Thaddeus, your Will Stutely character is about to come up. Like, keep your eyes open." I like your face got like you smiled for a second, and then I have to tell you, everyone, his face got so serious. He was like, like, all right. So, Thaddeus, what did you think of Will Stutely as a character?
I liked him. I thought it was a perfectly reasonable take on a member of the Merry Men, in that it's something that we don't see enough of in Robin Hood adaptations, where we had a character who was being horribly abused, first by the system, and he has a little monologue about how he was driven to poverty and despair through taxation and seizure of his livestock, and this drove him to poaching, so he wouldn't starve, and he's caught poaching, and that's why he's going to be punished in the town square. And in the ballad, he's going to be hanged from a gallows. In this movie, he's being hanged while dressed in the skin of a deer as the sheriff's guards ride by and beat him with sticks. But they have him being physically beaten. So he's somebody who's been terribly abused, both by the system and then physically abused by the sheriff's men, and then is rescued by Robin Hood, goes and joins the Merry Men, and then we see his wounds being treated in the Sherwood hideout. And there isn't a lot of that in adaptations where we see a character suffer under this yoke of oppression and then join the merry men. Usually we see something like the Little John, where it's like, oh, I'm just some guy, I'm interested in joining up. And often there isn't even a reason that's really given. Sometimes you get a vague sense of, oh, I've lost my home, so I'm desperate and I'm going to join Robin Hood. But actually having a character be physically harmed and then being rescued and then being part of the Merry Men from there on out. He shows up a couple more times. He has a confrontation in a little bit with the sheriff even. So I thought that was actually pretty well done. I liked how they did Will Stutely and incorporated him. In some of the ballads, like the Ballad of Little John, Will Stutely is the one who christens Little John with that name. And it kind of creates this impression of him being a very early member of the Merry Men and very, I don't know, kind of high ranking amongst them. And that's a version of that character that I like and kind of personally imagine. And this version of Will Stutely wasn't that, but I thought it was a very good way to bring in that character.
I liked their Prince John and Sheriff quite a bit. The Prince John, he reminded me a bit of, God, the name is just not in my brain. Oh God, The Adventures of Robin Hood. That name is on my the tip of my tongue.
Claude Rains.
Claude Rains, thank you. Literally, the name was like there. It was like I had it.
I got it. Claude Rains, Fools of us all. You're fine.
Yeah, he reminded me a bit of him in that he was very charming. He was a very charismatic Prince John, but also kind of smarmy. He's not as good as Claude Rains. I'm not going to say that he's as good as Claude Rains, but he reminded me of it.
So I have a note about Prince John that I feel I need to bring up, and especially in the context of this being a Disney film. So something I've heard a lot of from media critics and also from people in the LGBTQ community is how infamous Disney is for the gay coding of its villains.
Yes.
And this feels like an early example of it.
Not gonna argue with that. There's definitely some of that going on. At least in Prince John, in his case, yeah.
Not so much the Sheriff of Nottingham, but in the case of Prince John, he had a somewhat affected manner of speaking. Again, this is gay coded. There is nothing overt about Scar from The Lion King or Ratigan from The Great Mouse Detective being gay. But golly, it sure seems like they're being meant to be portrayed that way. And I got a lot of that from this Prince John in terms of how he spoke, how he gave it a kind of pronunciation of some words. Let's form a posse. We're going to have our men dressed in their livery, and was dressed in a lot of pinks and kind of purples. That gay coding of the villain felt very much there in his case.
I can't argue with that, and it is something that Disney has a history of doing. Way back. Mike, you look like you want to say something.
Yeah, I mean, first off, I definitely want to agree that the way they handle that kind of stuff, a lot of studios have handled LGBTQ characters in the past has really been hurtful and offensive. And I just want to add, with this movie, there is an interesting detail that I hope is maybe encouraging to that representation. And that is that Anthony Forwood, who in the movie portrayed the character of Will Scarlet in this movie was gay. And Anthony Forwood, as an actor, was with and lived with his long-term partner, Dirk Bogarde, in Amersham, England, and then France. And they lived together for many years, very happily. And he was kind of known as an actor who was gay in that community. I think because of laws back then and because of persecution, he didn't officially come out. And so if you're someone who's watching this and that's how you identify, I just want you to know, like, you belong in the Robin Hood story. And there has been a gay person who has, in a Disney film, portrayed Will Scarlet. So I know that that's not the perfect representation that the gay community deserves in the story of Robin Hood, but I just want you to know that it's there, and that Anthony Forwood is not forgotten as a gay person who was Will Scarlet in a Disney movie, in the first ever Disney movie about the story of Robin Hood. So much respect to Anthony Forwood, and
that's a good note. And if you get away from the film versions, there are many adaptations that one can find in graphic novels, comic books, novels that have very LGBTQ-friendly interpretations of Robin Hood and the Merry Men, which is an interpretation that I really like. These are people living outside of the dictates of normal society and law. I am really happy that those takes and interpretations are out there.
I also love the music in this movie, and I love the way that this movie could technically be considered a musical, because there are major songs sung throughout the film, and yet it's a musical in a very almost modern sense, like the way we watch musicals now, with very breathy, earthly singing. The songs have to come about naturally. This movie does that. Like, there's not everyone in the street breaks into a chorus. It's a minstrel walking around singing, who's both giving you plot, he's giving you plot while he sings, but he's also doing it in a very natural way. I mean, Elton Hayes was an incredible musician. He was known as, like, I think he was called the man with the small guitar or something like that, but he was an incredible natural singer. You know, you can kind of tell he's actually singing and playing in a lot of those shots. And the music is really just him singing, or it's other characters like Friar Tuck singing. This movie is a musical, but in the way that we almost think about musicals in the modern sense, where it's a natural musical. The characters are singing music as it comes out naturally through the character development and the plot development, which I think is actually kind of a cool thing that they were already doing in the 50s.
Yeah, well, like, for instance, Friar Tuck has a whole little musical sequence, which is him sitting under a tree singing a love song to himself, singing both parts of it, and kind of play acting out this whole. It's a great scene. It's his introduction. And it's great because it sets up the character. You know what kind of person this is. You know, they've got this humor to them. They've got this jocularity, and it does it. You know, it's witnessed by Robin, and then, you know, he kind of comes in and jokes around a little bit, but it's done kind of absent of any other characters.
And this is something that they lift from Howard Pyle. It was not something a device created for this movie, but it's the only adaptation I've seen that actually tried to work it in, and it would be a very difficult scene to do, because it's a weird scene. Friar Tuck is singing, as Rick said, this love song to himself, singing both the male and female parts, and then having Robin, like, join in. So it's a weird enough scene that I'm not ever surprised that it hasn't been adapted in other forms, but it was really cool to see it here, and they executed it wonderfully.
Yeah, and props to James Hayter for delivering what is both a broad and nuanced performance of Friar Tuck. Throughout the movie that he is there, he's a personality.
So I'll totally admit that I, as like a guy who wrote a play about Friar Tuck, I really, really love, and I'm really kind of nerding out on the fact, Thad, that you recognize that moment was from Howard Pyle's play. A lot of people don't pick up on that, and one, I love that you picked up on it. Two, I love that Disney kind of knew that. Like, they drew a lot from the original source material and from, like, the classic source material of Robin Hood to create this. And I admit, like, the guy who wrote a Friar Tuck play, I really wanted to find a way to sneak, like, Friar Tuck having, like, a love kind of song back and forth to himself in my own version, and I just wasn't able to create it in the version I wanted to create. But man, I do respect that they did that with theirs. And as much as I love Eugene Pallett, who's Friar Tuck in the Errol Flynn Adventures of Robin Hood, I really do think that this is probably the Friar Tuck I love the most. I love this performance of Friar Tuck. I love this portrayal of Friar Tuck. And whenever I wrote Friar Tuck, I think subconsciously this was the guy that was in my head when I wrote my play of Friar Tuck. Why this Robin Hood will always have a special place in my heart. Rick, I know I sold you up on, Richard Todd as a very, athletic Robin Hood.
Mhm.
What do you think? Did my D-Day boy impress you? Was he a pretty athletic Robin?
He was very athletic. You definitely felt him doing the stunts. Like, because when he's doing a stunt, his face is full view. It's not some look-alike. It's not a body double.
Mhm.
There were two places where I felt there was some fight, like the initial fight scene between where he's got the dagger and Tuck has a sword felt just a little clumsy, but I'm not going to blame either actor for that.
Yeah.
Um,
I love how there's just a shot, and it's just a straight shot. He twirls around a tree, does a sexy smile,
Yes.
and holds up his plate.
yeah,
Like it's as cheap 1950s as you could get.
Yes.
But I gotta say, kind of nails it, right?
oh, he does. I liked him as Robin Hood. I thought he had the charisma to do it. He definitely had the physicality because he's jumping around. He's jumping on the back of moving, galloping horses and climbing, raising drawbridges and carrying Friar Tuck, who was again played by a heavy set actor who probably weighs about what I do, and I am not a thin person, shall we say? But yeah, he's charming without being insipid. He's funny and mostly very natural feeling. There's one or two places where it feels just a little stiff, but
Agreed.
again, it's 1952. I thought Todd brought a lot to the part without trying to copy Flynn, which is something that we saw in some of the previous, Sons of Robin Hood, where they're trying to copy Flynn's boyish charm, and Todd doesn't do that. He's got a boyish charm, but it's his own boyish charm. Most of the time, he's very natural as an actor.
How did we feel about Maid Marian in this movie?
I liked her. I felt she did a good job. I was reading a little bit in the trivia that apparently Richard Todd did not feel she was going to be strong enough. I don't know if he changed his mind over the course of the movie or whatever, but I felt they played very well off of one another. I thought the chemistry was there. They felt like people who knew each other and who had this flirtatious back and forth as part of their, kind of personal vernacular. And I also felt the actress herself, even, in scenes without Robin, did a good job. When she's talking to the Queen and she's talking to Prince John, and he's like, "Oh yeah, I'm going to throw you in a prison cell now." I thought she did a good job. I enjoyed her.
What are your thoughts there, Mike?
This was, I think, only her third movie. She did two before, Blackmailed in 1951 and One Wild Oat in 1951. And then she did Story of Robin Hood. So she was very new to acting. I think there were some concerns about, whether or not she was as classically trained as someone like Richard Todd was, who, before the war, don't forget, he had been classically trained. He was trained at Italia Conti Academy in London. So he had a good acting education to build on, and she kind of was just kind of quick out of her own experience. So I think there was some concern, but I think she actually did very well. I think she was a very good Marian. I, kind of think there were some melodramatic moments where, like, literally the moment where she turns and goes, "Oh, Robin, will I ever see you again?" Like, that's kind of laughable. Like, I think we both, my girlfriend and I, kind of looked at each other and chuckled at that moment. But as soon as they kissed, like, my girlfriend was very happy. Like, this actress still did a really good job, like, giving Marian a strong emotional core. And compared to Olivia de Havilland, who I love Olivia de Havilland's Marian, but compared to her, this was much more of a very tomboyish Marian, like we see in the original Legends. So I give them some kudos for going there with it. And yeah, overall, I think this was a pretty solid Marian.
Well, and she had good agency in this movie. You know, she
Yeah.
kind of does her
She-
own thing in several parts.
She did. She didn't have a lot to actually really do or accomplish with some of that.
Very
And
true. But
I don't know. She was their,
she wasn't.
their political voice. Like, she goes up before everyone and says, "This was the money given by Robin Fitzooten's band." Like, she was the front face of Robin Hood's gang.
Yeah, but that's kind of like the moment that she gets. She doesn't have a lot besides that.
That's true.
And I thought the actress did a fine job, but there was nothing I found jarring or off-putting about her performance. I thought her relationship with Robin Hood, it felt sweet. It felt nice. You know, there was some really nice banter between the two of them at the very beginning of the film, and so you could really kind of see that as that was really the kind of the core of their relationship. There wasn't much that happened later to build off of that I might have liked to have seen. There wasn't a room to really grow and develop the romance. Yeah. But we had seen enough early on that it didn't feel forced or out of place or anything. So I would have liked to have seen more, like a broader, more developed role. She had an just wildly unconvincing page boy costume.
Yes, that's true. What? What are you talking about? I was totally taken out.
You young man. Yeah,
you
that was.
Tell that beautiful woman with eyeliner and lipstick wasn't a boy.
Well, she's wearing pants. I mean, he's wearing pants. So no, of course I couldn't tell. No, that part was just utterly ridiculous to the point that it kind of took me out of the movie. Some, it was so egregious, the idea that anybody would possibly think that was supposed to be a page boy. And not a noble.
They didn't have eyeglasses. Everybody's eyesight is terrible at that point, and because they're not getting enough vitamin A.
And then, so what I was really kind of hoping to see, though, after she had her page boy moment, was that she would then get to join Robin Hood's band, and that would be something a little bit different from what we had seen from the earlier movies. And to your point earlier, with her being a little bit more tomboyish, like we saw early in the film when she was in the forest with Robin, go along the lines of those earlier ballads where she does join the Merry Men. But then she didn't. She went back to court. And then at the end, we do see her dressed like one of the Merry Men. But at the first sign of anything happening, Robin tells her to stay in the cave. You know, that, like, yeah. I didn't love that. I wanted to see more of that. I was hoping that we would get something where she would actually get to be a member of the Merry Men for a little while, but then it just never happened. Sheriff of Nottingham. I thought he was fine. But he was mostly just kind of Prince John's henchman. There wasn't a lot of real character development there. He sort of filled the role that he needed to fill, but there also wasn't a lot of personal tension between him and Robin. Yeah, he felt underdeveloped, but also not, I guess, awful as a character in the film.
He felt a little underdeveloped. So the Sheriff of Nottingham in this case is utterly and completely Prince John's toady, who gets the post because the previous sheriff runs off to the Crusades with Richard, and he henches. He's the henchman. I felt his motivations for hating Robin Hood are actually pretty well defined, just in that Robin Hood humiliates him multiple times in multiple ways, up to and including kidnapping him and then putting him on his horse blindfolded and backward with a set of deer antler on him, and kind of kicks the horse to go riding off back to town. So by the time at the end, when they do have their confrontation, I feel there's absolutely, justification for why the sheriff hates Robin Hood. And he's also, repeatedly shown to be a dishonorable person, and this is culminated at the end. And big spoiler alert, there is no big sword fight between them at the end.
Oh.
There is a gruesome death up there with the gruesome death of the sheriff of Nottingham in the Fairbanks Robin Hood.
Or Guy of Gisborne in the Fairbanks movie.
Yeah, sorry, yeah, Guy of Gisborne in the Fairbanks Robin Hood. In this case, he is crushed by a raising drawbridge. That is just like.
Now it's not. It's not gory. It's not gory. It's not visceral. You see him about to kind of be pinched and flattened by that.
Yeah. So, yeah, I do feel like the character was underdeveloped, but I felt it was very well portrayed. I liked the actor. I thought he did an excellent job. He had a great seething face. Where he
very
was just
lots
like,
of scowling.
Lots of scowling, but he also he was really good at delivering the lines and playing the character and making you feel what this character was feeling without necessarily stating what this character was feeling.
I would have liked to see more motivation, other than I'm henching for Prince John and I'm greedy and want taxes.
I mean, that's fair, but you felt the hench life. I mean,
what were your thoughts, Mike?
I think what they tried to do, honestly, is meld the Basil Rathbone Guy of Gisborne character into the role of the Sheriff of Nottingham, and that's kind of how they did it. Again, I think this was a film that definitely knew, hey, the Robin Hood film is the Errol Flynn Robin Hood. Let's do that, but Disney it and add a lot more historical lore into it to kind of make it feel fresh. And I think that was kind of their equation for making this movie. So if you've got the main villain character, they're going to want to do Prince John, but they're going to want to do Guy of Gisborne. Well, really, in the lore, the sheriff is the big bad guy. Let's take the Guy of Gisborne, Basil Rathbone character of being the stiff, dark-haired with dark goatee character, put him as the sheriff, and call it good. And if we do a sword fight on the stairs, it'll be too identical. So let's do a final fight with a spear on a closing drawbridge, which I actually think was kind of creepy. Like, as soon as they're climbing, it's rising. There's this feeling of, oh, we're getting closer, we're getting to the end. He falls down, gets caught in between. The music climaxes, and you're like, oh, God, he's stuck. What's going to happen to him? Cuts back to Robin Hood, climb out, and you see the drawbridge still closing. You kind of know what's happening to him. I thought it was actually a very, shall we say, Disney way to, showcase one of the darker villain deaths. This guy got chopped in half by a drawbridge. In terms of villain deaths, that's pretty gruesome. So props to Disney for in the 1950s giving us a pretty grueling villain death for the henchman Sheriff of Nottingham.
Well, the nice thing about actually that scene is that not just does that happen, but the tension doesn't stop because Robin is still trying to escape. He's climbing this drawbridge, and he has to kind of make it over before the drawbridge just closes. So that was a good scene. I enjoyed that scene.
I certainly didn't mind that there wasn't a climactic sword fight between the two of them. It would have felt unearned, as well as feeling just like they're trying to duplicate the other films. And the tension towards the end with him making it out over the drawbridge before it closed was very well paced. That was very well done. I really felt that tension kind of on the edge of my seat there. I have other thoughts about the kind of climax of the movie, but I'll get to that later. We got somebody in this film who we have not seen a lot of before, but who does pop up in Robin Hood lore. Queen Eleanor of Aquitaine, the mother of Prince John and King Richard. And the actress, was no Katharine Hepburn from The Lion in Winter, but who is? That's just one of the most iconic, performances of all time. But I thought she did a perfect.
Hepburn did not perform that role yet when this movie came out. In all fairness to the actress who played Eleanor.
Yes. It was still going to be a good 20 plus years until The Lion in Winter.
Yeah. In all fairness to the poor actress who played Eleanor in this film.
Yeah, and I think she did a perfectly fine job.
Same. Yeah.
A little bit more trusting of Prince John than I think the historical Queen Eleanor would have been. One of the things that I think the Lion in Winter movie portrayed accurately is that there was a rather tense relationship between the two of them, as she did notably favor Richard over John.
Yeah, which is true in real life too. She really did.
Oh, well, yeah. Well, that's what I was saying. That in real life she did. Unlike in this movie where she's just like, "Oh, these are just both my sons. They're brothers. They love each other. John will support Richard."
Now, Eleanor was a little bit more keyed in than that.
Yeah.
Yeah, and this I will also add this portrayal of the Crusades where Richard is like, yes, we must temper justice with mercy, and we're gonna go off and fight a noble crusade. Bishop, would you pray for us? The historical Richard was not as sanctimoniously minded. He may have been very religious. It might be true that Richard the Lionheart did have very deep religious personal feelings, but in terms of how he waged that crusade, I don't think he was as worried about making sure he followed the Sermon on the Mount, shall we say.
Yeah, that's one thing I noticed, that this film, again, talking about it being a film from the time, and this is 52, so we're starting to get into the Cold War, we're starting to get into anti-communist sentiment.
That's what I think it's about too.
Under God added to the Pledge of Allegiance, and this film goes it is not a heavily religious film with lots of hefty religious overtones, but it's got this is a holy crusade that is being blessed. The Archbishop of Canterbury is a worthy figure, trying to look out for the best interests of the people and of the good noblemen like Eleanor and Richard. There is no hint that any of the church people that we see presented could be corrupt. There's no questioning of that moral authority.
Well,
there is a mention of the Bishop of Hereford being robbed, but we don't actually see that happening. And it's a very different tone from the 38 film where we have the corrupt Bishop of the Black Canon. This one is very much, church people are good people. Don't question that.
Well, and to the point of where there's a mention when they're talking about the ransom of Richard, where they receive a donation of, I think it's 30,000 marks from monasteries who have melted down their plates.
Yes. Right. I'm sure that happened.
Yeah. No, but I will say also, you get the favorite moment of the Archbishop is when they're transporting the money and they're getting robbed, and dude pulls out a spiked mace, and I just had moments of Dungeons and Dragons vindicated, because it's not little, it's a beefy nasty boy.
Yeah, it looked like a barbarian weapon.
It did, and he's dressed in his full purples, purple velvet.
Him and the horse he rode in on.
Not ready to go down without a fight. But yeah, there is definitely that little bit of, here is the moral superiority of the church in England, and look how loyal they are to the rightful king. And
just want to point out for any hardcore Robin Hood fans out there, the true Archbishop of Canterbury was during that time period was Baldwin of Ford, and not a great dude. There's one note that he was, quote, more damaging to Christianity than Saladin. This was very much a Disney portrayal of the historical Archbishop of Canterbury during that time. And we encourage you always to look up your own historical characters in real life versus whatever a Robin Hood play would portray of them.
Now, I will say, actually, I do want to mention one thing. Speaking of historicity and historical accuracy, the costumery in this movie was good. It looked good. There were touches like they had the right helmets for 12th century English soldiers. They were wearing kettle helms. And they weren't just wearing kettle helms. they were wearing arming hoods under them, the way you would, because kettle helms are not comfortable.
That's true. That's a really good
and
detail.
yeah, it was one of those things that I know, and it was noticed. You notice it. One of the things that overall about this movie that I feel is that people put research time into it. They obviously read a chunk of the Robin Hood ballads, not just depending on Pyle, but they went into some of the other sources.
Yeah.
They put in some research into the historical costumery and outfits that would have been seen and everything. And so from that side of things, yeah, I appreciated that. It was not all people wearing brown and black and gray. Even the peasantry had color. There's men there, at least people there in blues and reds and other colors. I was appreciative of that as somebody who's studied the medieval era and realizes, unlike most modern costumers of medieval films, that clothing dye existed and was used. And so, yeah, I appreciated that. I genuinely did.
So one thing that I really respected about this film, even though there is a lot of 1950s elements that gets a lot of history wrong, is that the costumes for its time period are pretty good. I mean, there was even one moment where I was looking at a peasant's hat, and there was a part of my brain that was like, well, that looks silly. But then I remember another part of my brain that loves history, especially medieval history, and thinking, well, hey, what have you seen on medieval tapestries? Hats like that. Mm-hmm. And I thought this movie actually did a really good job of portraying historical clothing in a way that, even though, of course, it wasn't perfect, and of course, none of us have done it perfect to what it would have really looked like, but, I thought it was, for its time, compared to the Errol Flynn movie that was the most well-known Robin Hood movie before this, like, it got the medieval clothing pretty spot on. And I gotta say, this is maybe my favorite Robin Hood costume. I love that he's just got a very olive green, Lincoln green tunic with a hood that wraps around his chest, followed by like short sleeves, and then he's got green stockings and taller leather boots. As you generally think about what Robin Hood looks like, this is kind of the best blend of both the medieval actual look paired with the kind of costume Robin Hood look that we all kind of have in our mind. He even has the medieval hat with the cocked hat with the little sharp point at the end like a baseball hat, and then he's got the feather in the back. And then Friar Tuck throws it off him as if to say, hey, we're getting rid of the hat. Like, this is our own Robin Hood. And I thought this movie actually did a pretty smart job with making the costumes both relatable but also historically credible. And it wasn't perfect, but for its time, good job, Disney. They did a nice job. Historical costume department, good job on this movie. Well done.
Mm-hmm. I would agree. It was refreshing also just to not see all the costumes getting recycled again and again, like we were seeing in a bunch of the cheap Robin Hood films coming out in the 40s.
Yeah, and in the John Derek movie, he's like wearing the exact same Basil Rathbone and Errol Flynn costume. It's a little too.
Well, even the Cornell Wilde costume he wears as well.
Yeah. The whole, like, honestly, the number of times that that one with the red and white one with the battle axe on it got recycled and reworn in Robin Hood movies. It's one of those ones that's especially noticeable to me.
So let's go ahead and move on to our list of questions. Mike, what would you consider the best feat of archery?
I mean, I guess I would have to say it's Robin Hood's dad splitting his own arrow, which I thought was a very fun take on not only giving a twist in the story of it's not Robin who splits the arrow, it's his dad, Hugh Fitzooth. But I also love that you kind of get to see where Robin gets his archery prowess from. It's his dad. And it also shows the environment Robin grew up in. He's got a dad who splits arrows and is like, kid, you take the golden arrow, give it to your sweetheart, His dad is the one who speaks out against injustice. His dad is the one who talks to the sheriff. His dad is the one who tells them, I'm not going to raise my bow against my neighbor. His dad is the one who even gets killed, shot in the back for his beliefs. So I think that as much as his dad kind of has a minor role in the film, they tried to make sure you understood Robin Hood's dad had a major role in his life.
Right.
That was a kind of very meaningful way. Again, it's a Disney film, so like, how can we have a parent mean something and then kill the parent and make this kid an orphan? It's a very Disney way
What?
of doing it. Like but again,
that's a good point. I didn't think of that.
yeah, but again, this is a Disney Robin Hood movie. I have to ask it, where is Robin Hood's mother? Where is Bella's mother? Why did they kill off Robin Hood's mom? Again, this is a Disney Robin Hood, so Robin's gonna be an orphan. I shouldn't judge because in my Robin Hood, Robin Hood's an orphan. But yeah, so I do think that the dad splitting the archery is, it's gonna be the best. Although Robin, under pressure, out from a tree, ducks under an arrow, pops up, shoots Red Gill right in the heart. That's a pretty good archery shot too. So yeah, a lot of very impressive archery in this movie. I also love how this movie did something different, which is where it actually invented message arrows. So arrows are whistle, so you can hear they're coming. Arrows are red and white, which means friend or foe. Arrows have different color coding for who's sending the arrow, what the arrow can mean. That was a pretty cool little addition to how they communicate in the Robin Hood story. And they also were one of the first Robin Hood movies to showcase Robin Hood's horn. In the legends, Robin Hood famously blasts on his horn and calls his men to him. In this movie, he taps his horn. If I need your help, I'll call. It was almost like they were making a pun about phones, about having a phone available in the home. And so they were like, hey, if Robin had a phone, it was his horn or it was his arrow. So I think it was a fun way in the 1950s to modernize the story of Robin Hood to showcase a communication system that could be relevant to the modern viewers of the 1950s. And yeah, I thought that the archery that was probably most impressive was the fact that they modernized Robin Hood's arrow system as a communication system. I thought that was kind of a cool feat.
I thought that the whistle arrows were a little they were anachronistic, but the coloring of the arrows absolutely to communicate, hey, there's people in the forest. We don't know if they're friend or foe, or there's enemies in the forest. I definitely like that. One of the things actually I will say about the archery in this movie, and I would actually probably pick the same shot, the splitting the arrow. I thought it was really well done. It looked like they actually did have a trick archer do the shot, at least for the close up of the target. But one of the things actually I want to mention, this kind of gets us back into the historical accuracy question. This is one of the only Robin Hood movies I have seen. Granted, I have not seen all of them, but one of the only ones I've seen where they show people with longbows angling up into the sky to shoot distance.
Yeah.
Which is in almost every other Robin Hood movie, people are aiming flat. And in this, they're getting up to like 45-degree angles. They're angling it up. And it's a little thing. It has nothing to do with the story. It's not pointed out, but it's there.
I will add that in Russell Crowe's 2010 film, the Ridley Scott movie Robin Hood, they do angle a little bit, but yeah, this was the first movie to really showcase it, I think, in the best way.
Yeah. The film started with a lot of archery. The first time we see Robin, he's trying to shoot a willow wand as a target, and that's another really good callback to the ballads, because that's one of the typical targets that they would shoot at in the Greenwood, is just a rod of willow or other type of wood stuck in the ground, a very small, thin target, and that's what makes it so impressive, is if you can hit that. So that was another really solid callback to the legends. And then we've got the archery tournament, the shooting of Robin's father, and then of Red Gill. But then it drops off in terms of having any archery really for a long time, aside from the signal arrows. It gets used towards the end as some guards are shooting at Robin and some merry men are shooting at the guards. But that's really it. We've pretty much covered all of the archery that occurs, I think, just in that. I will second or third the signal arrows as being a really cool addition and a really fun and unique sort of thing. The splitting the arrow is a cool feat, but it's also such a cliche one.
It is, but I liked that there was a twist on it. That they changed the fundamental, like, who did it,
Mm-hmm.
kind of when it's done in the story.
Yeah.
Mike mentioned it, but I like it. Like, that's one thing I do like about this movie is that it plays with the source material. And that's that, when it's done well, playing with source material can turn out really good, because it gives you things you don't expect, gives you variations.
Yeah.
And that's a good thing.
I was caught off guard by that. I thought it was pretty cool.
Mhm.
All right, so best example of swashbuckling action. Rick?
Ooh, man, that's there are a couple pretty good ones. I do like the rescue of the one guy in Nottingham Square. I think that's really
Will
good.
Stutely.
Will Stutely, thank
Will
you.
Stutely.
I'm tired and I don't always remember names, as witnessed earlier when I could not remember Claude Rains' name, a name that I've said probably a couple hundred times
That's right.
in the last few years. But the rescue of Will Stutely I thought was really good. I thought it had a lot of good swashbuckling, hopping up on horses that are moving, and hopping off of them to beat the crap out of people. That would probably be the one I would go for. I do actually like the end where Robin is escaping and he's dodging these guards and everything, but I feel it's less swashbuckling. You do get the climbing up of the drawbridge, which is that physicality, but it's less swashbuckling.
Yeah, no, that felt very real and visceral, that climbing. It didn't have the easy up and over that you would have expected from a Douglas Fairbanks.
Yeah, exactly. And if anything, it's the opposite of a criticism, I feel, because having that kind of realistic feeling, that visceralness in a movie of that era, in a Disney movie of that era, is saying something.
Yeah, it created the tension that scene needed. Mike, what's your thoughts on best example of swashbuckling action?
I think, though, for me, honestly, I love the moment where Robin leaps onto the tree, kicks the sheriff in the chest, and then swings onto his horse and rides off. But then I love how, as Robin's riding away, he calls on the horn, and the horn almost peaks with the music as he jumps away from the horse onto the hill, through the water. It's all very epic. It's very raw, and then it's just the music's kind of building in this almost troubling crescendo of, is he going to make it? Where Robin's just clawing his way up a hill in the middle of the forest. His arrows are slapping the dirt around him. Puffs of smoke steaming up as he's making his way up, and you're like, oh man, arrows are getting they're getting closer. They're getting closer. Are they going to get him? And then all of a sudden, the merry men appear up at the top of the hill with the horn, recall. I think it's just such an epic, sweet moment. But yeah, props to this movie for using a lot of real stunts. Every time you see a guy hit by an arrow, it's a real arrow that got shot into a board, under an actor's shirt. Or, there's a couple, awkward moments. I don't know if anyone caught it, but Robin's quiver kind of falls off him when he's in the middle of the water. He's chasing the sheriff. Man, it's kind of awkwardly bad. Hello, 1950s. I love that moment of the battle with the sheriff in the water. I think there's just something so raw and naturalistic about it, and the way it was done with real stunts is just really kind of ups the ante of is this guy gonna be okay? Is this actor gonna be okay? It does a good job of bringing Robin Hood back to the woods in a very real way in my mind. I love that moment.
Yeah. There were not a ton of examples of what we would traditionally think of as swashbuckling action. There was a lot of good physicality. There were definitely a couple of moments, and I think we hit the highlights, that rescue of Will Stutely and the fight with the sheriff's men near the riverbank. I picked the same moment with the swinging on the branch and onto the horse. And I just kind of wrote the note, leaping on and off of horses, because it happens a couple of times, and it's very well done. But there's not a lot of the sort of sword play, or even swinging from chandeliers or banners or tapestries, and not a lot of that action in castles that we would think of. Not a lot of those sword fighting duels. There's a little bit of sword fighting here and there, but really very little of it. And I think that was a really good an interesting way to help differentiate this movie and help convey that idea of this isn't a nobleman. This is not a Robin who was a knight. This was not a Robin who was a crusader. I totally thought that was the direction that they were going to go when the film started.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
It started with Richard going off on the Crusades, and it started with Huntington. But Robin was not the Earl of Huntington about to go off on the Crusades, like Douglas Fairbanks. Like for Douglas Fairbanks' Robin Hood is called Huntington more than he's called Robin Hood.
Right. Yes.
And I have to wonder. I wonder if they did that intentionally to kind of throw you a curveball.
The Earl of Huntington was Marion's father in this film,
right. Yeah.
and Robin and his father worked for him. They were foresters, freemen yeomen, so not serfs, but also definitely not gentry, in the employ of Marion's father. And as such, they were able to enter this archery contest and make a good showing. But even like Queen Eleanor recognizes them as like, oh, well done, good yeoman. But they were not knights, and he doesn't do a lot of sword fighting. And I think it was a really good way to help reinforce that this was a lower class Robin Hood by not having him do a lot of sword fighting.
Yeah, if you think about it, Robin only becomes Robin of Locksley, Earl of Huntington, by the merit of Marion. Like, she's really the one who gives the title, not his own position in life. She's the real power. If you think about
at the very end, the king, grants him in Locksley Manor or whatever.
Right.
But yeah, so it made it, but it did make it harder to pick good swashbuckling moments because it had less swashbuckling than we traditionally think of for Robin Hood. How was it for banter, though? Mike, did you have a favorite bit of wittiest banter?
What do you think my favorite wittiest banter was?
I don't actually know, I'm afraid.
Yeah, you do. I wrote a whole play about him. You know what my favorite was.
Well, he had a number of good lines. I know what my favorite was.
What was your favorite Friar Tuck line? Because mine was obviously Friar Tuck. What was your favorite Friar Tuck line?
My favorite was when they have the sheriff in Sherwood Forest and they're making him pay the merry men for his dinner, but also then taking an account for his crimes. And Tuck is taking the role of accountant and adding it all up. And he's getting all of these grievances from all of the other merry men about the lashings that they have suffered, from the seizure of their property, and he counts it all up and he says, okay, you owe 100 shillings. Then he reaches up and feels the bump on his head that he got earlier from the sheriff and doubles it. His personal injury doubles it to 200 shillings. So he touches his head and then says, 200 shillings. That was my favorite moment.
That, my friend, you know me so well. That is my favorite moment in the whole movie, where Friar Tuck touches. Well, I think we should acknowledge is the most fakest makeup bump I've ever seen on anyone's head. But the fact that he does it, and I love the fact that every time Robin Hood steals, it is really from the sheriff. Whether it's him in the courtyard stealing all the sheriff's money to pay the tax for Richard's ransom, or whether it's him in the forest with the sheriff, which they've captured the sheriff. Another great tribute to the legend where Robin Hood has the sheriff in his hands. I love the fact that they make the sheriff pay for every toll for this lad's back 9 crowns. He makes him pay for every strip of blood that he took, which is kind of similar to what Abraham Lincoln said in his second inaugural address. Look it up. But I love that they actually make the law pay for how it hurts the people the law hurts. There's a lot of very, frankly, relevant and powerful modernizations we could do to that. How much does the police force owe for every citizen it's shot who wasn't guilty? Or frankly, for every citizen it's shot who never got a trial, guilty or not? Or let's even get more real. For every citizen it's shot whose crime didn't merit lethal execution. How much?
The question of Does any crime merit lethal execution?
Well, and there's forfeiture that police engage in too.
Yeah, there's.
Yeah, isn't it amazing that this 1950s Disney Robin Hood movie made the sheriff answer that financially? Because let's face it, if I love Walt Disney, I love Walt Disney movies, but I think Disney in a lot of ways was a man who was very financially calculating. Like, weirdly enough, if I was going to pinpoint any one character in the movie to relate to Walt Disney, as much as Walt Disney was a man who loved the people, he loved old school storytelling, he loved the average person and celebrating the story in the film, Walt Disney was a money huckster in a lot of ways.
What?
God bless what Disney has given the world, but that guy did a lot of negative things with money, and he did a lot of things with money that could be relatable to the sheriff in this movie. If you had to tax every single thing Walt Disney ever did with money, the way Friar Tuck wrote on a table with a knife everything the sheriff ever did to every single person at that table who was now outlawed, you get a high figure. This was a movie that tried to calculate that. If you think of like what the sheriff of Nottingham symbolizes to you, whoever the legal injustices in your life are, like whether it's student loans or police forces that are unjust or political forces that are unjust, whatever it is, put them down at a table. Like, try to financially think, how much does corrupt power owe you for every dollar and penny that they've taken out of your life, and write it down and then charge them for it. That scenario happened in a Walt Disney movie about Robin Hood in the 1950s. That's kind of great.
How about you, Rick? Did you have...
I can't top any of that. I'm not following that. I enjoyed that particular scene quite a bit. I actually really enjoyed the banter between Marion and Robin quite a bit. Like, I don't know if it's my favorite, but I enjoyed it, especially at the start of the movie. I thought that whole little conversation they had was endearing. It worked.
Yeah. Endearing.
But I do agree that I think Friar Tuck definitely got the best banter of the movie.
Yeah.
I'm not going to reiterate all the social messaging because I don't disagree with it.
All right, I'm a huge nerd. I apologize for making rambling.
No, dude, you don't worry, fellow traveler. It's okay.
We can definitely have plugs for social activism in a Robin Hood related podcast.
What?
I'm
only
so
on
sorry
board with
for
that. No, don't apologize. Go harder.
Yeah. So seriously, it is fine. It is perfectly fine.
But I do think we can go ahead and transition after that nice endorsement of Friar Tuck and some of the scenes that he's in. Should I guess who your pick for Merriest Man might be there, Mike? Because I'm sensing it might be they did introduce Scathach as a merryman, and he did a pretty decent job. Is that who you would pick?
Well, no, I think Scathach didn't do a good job when he got hit in the mouth with a whip and he fell over. So
Okay, so not Scathach, maybe.
Yeah, can't rely on that guy. He falls over when he gets hit in the mouth. So although it was telling, they had a character get hit in the mouth when they were trying to silence him, which was pretty nice little symbolic way to showcase that. I mean, I think it's pretty obvious who my favorite character is. I love Friar Tuck in this movie. I love that he's on a date with himself, which obviously is an echo for the Howard Pyle Friar Tuck. I love that Tuck is someone who is fighting with Robin, literally in a duel to the death with this guy. And maybe in his mind, the legal authorities show up to take the outlaw into custody, and Friar Tuck is like, I gotta protect this outlaw. I gotta make sure he's okay. The sheriff says, "Stand aside, please." Yeah, look you. Until our private fight is settled, your personal claim on it can wait. I love that he sees whatever him and Robin Hood doing is private, and what the sheriff is doing with Robin Hood is personal. Mm-hmm. That's a really interesting phrasing that Friar Tuck delivers. There's such a brilliance in
That's a pretty good piece of banter, I will say.
Yeah. Yeah, like there's a lot of depth in that little moment where he understands what him and Robin have is like kind of something special. They're playing each other. You carry me, I carry you, you carry me. And that's to be fair, not a lot of the legends do the back and forth. They do Friar Tuck carries Robin and he throws him. But in the original legend, he makes him carry him back. And it goes like there's this back and forth. That's such a beautiful thing about Friar Tuck, where he's like, I'm not gonna like end this. No, this is the game you want to play? Okay, boy, let's play. You carry me back. And Friar Tuck has always had a very instructioning, very parental nature over Robin, where he's like, eye for eye, tooth for tooth, piggyback for piggyback. Let's do this, Robin. And I think he's always trying to teach this guy something. Friar Tuck always cares about the spiritual soul of whoever he's dealing with, and he does this with Robin in this film. He does it with Marion, where as soon as Marion shows up and is like, I don't trust you, like, you become a common thief. Robin's like, have her talk to Tuck. And Tuck is, the next scene we see is Tuck explained to her, look, we haven't forsaken our vows, we haven't forsaken our religion. Gives Robin a nodding wink of, there are some who have not wives that want them. Wink, He knows Robin is a crush. He knows Robin loves Marion and wants to be married to her. I love this Friar Tuck so much. But I will say I'm biased on Friar Tuck because I literally wrote a play about the guy. Thank you, Pigeon Creek. Love you. The other character I would say is the best merry man is probably Alan Dale. This Alan Dale not only carries the story, sings beautifully, but is like one of the best plot fillers. If you're a scriptwriter, like, how can I get main chunks of the plot through to the audience in an easy, simple, colorful way? Well, what if I have a minstrel to sing it? And what if the minstrel is part of the plot? Alan Dale, perfection. So this Alan Dale did a good job. So Friar Tuck and Alan Dale are my main roles.
Rick, anything to add? Any favorite side characters? And so this is the Merriest Man Award. This is the member of the supporting cast that we would most like to recruit as a member of our outlaw band.
I mean, I'm gonna have to give it to Friar Tuck in this one. I don't want to repeat everything that Mike, because obviously Mike knows this film better than I do, but he's right.
It's pathetically nerdy. I know.
It is not pathetically nerdy, not at all.
I mean, it is nerdy.
It is nerdy. It's just not pathetically nerdy. No, I mean, I'd pick Friar Tuck. I mean, he's kind of everything. And, he's like actually, Little John is kind of on almost nothing character, like by comparison, a nothing character. Him and Will Scarlet kind of do stuff, but
I did like when he just hiked the Miller up under his arm.
Yeah, that was pretty good when he hiked the Midge Miller. But I mean, yeah, and I did like Alan Dale, but he actually doesn't become a merry man until fairly late on, and then he's just really a minstrel playing songs for the merry men. So yeah, I'm gonna have to give it to Friar Tuck because once he joins, there's the whole fantastic introduction scene between him and Robin. But then once he joins, he's the one doing things. He's the one that escorts Marion back. He's the one that is explaining things. And yeah, I mean, definitely Friar Tuck as Merriest Man.
So,
please tell me you're not going to say Stuteley as the best just because you love Stuteley.
Okay, well, so one of the things that I've been getting a kick out of with this whole Merriest Man Award is watching who gets it and sort of imagining the outlaw band that would be formed from all of these characters. The very first award goes to... Yeah, so the very first award went to Little John in the 1922 silent film, Magnificent. Then we had Much the Miller's Son, played by Herbert Munden from the 38 film. Also just incredible character. And they're all like serving very different roles. Then we had Alan Dale was a very impressive minstrel spy character in The Bandit of Sherwood Forest. Then in Prince of Thieves, we had Maud, who was an incredible character, the sassy, clever, headstrong handmaiden, who also went into battle, wielding a sword. And then we finally, in Rogues of Sherwood Forest, got Friar Tuck. So that's 5 entirely different characters making up a really incredible, very varied outlaw band. And so I was kind of hoping, though, that the trend could continue of it continuing to be different characters each time. But we're going to have to give it to Friar Tuck twice in a row because James Mader just did an amazing job, and it was a brilliant performance. It was very fun. He absolutely stood out amongst the merry men, and none of the other supporting characters really did anything enough of note to make them be somebody I would want to especially recruit to my outlaw band. I'm still kind of waiting for a Maid Marian, who I want to pick as my recruit. And she's gotten honorable mention a couple of times, but this one's not going to quite take it either. Yeah, Friar Tuck, twice in a row.
When you get to Lucy Griffiths will probably be your first Maid Marian. She's the best in that BBC role.
I really like Bernadette O'Farrell from the 56 television show.
I love Bernadette. She's great.
Yeah. And I will second the honorable mention runner-up going to the Alan Adale. It is a very nicely done performance. Not only does he sing beautifully, but the actor emotes a lot in his face. There's lots of good cheeky moments as he's trying to busk from the various crowds. He even tries to busk from Robin Hood, which is a nice little moment.
Yeah.
And then happily goes along with the merry men, and he's got his little dog with him. It's great. But Tuck has to take it. He's the merriest man, hands down, for this film. Now, on a scale of 1 to 10, in this film, how robbed were the rich? How well does Robin Hood serve as a champion of the poor and oppressed and an enemy of the upper echelons, of those 1%ers? Rick, what's your rating for this?
Ooh, I mean, I'm kind of mixed on this because there's a couple points where it seems honestly like we are in this movie more told that he's robbing from the rich and giving to the poor than shown he is robbing from the rich and giving to the poor, because we see him beat up the sheriff a few times, and there's the scene where the sheriff is made to recompense people for the beating up of people, but we don't see robbing merchants. We don't see Robin giving coins away at all. The one time coins are given, it is to ransom Richard, not to help anybody. So overall, I actually have to give this a fairly low rating. Because, like I said, we're told by Alan Adale and by mentions from the sheriff and from Prince John that he's doing this, but we're not really shown it. And so I'm going to give it probably like a 3. He does steal a lot from the sheriff, but it's not given to the poor on screen.
I totally agree with you, Rick. I think that we never actually see Robin giving to the poor in this movie. However, one thing I think this movie tried to balance was we get to see who the poor are. And I think, Thad, this is something you and I have talked about, which is it's very important to us that Robin has a connection to the poor. He knows their names. He understands what their struggles are. I think that little scene you have where Friar Tuck is literally charging the sheriff for every wrong he's ever done to a poor person who's now in Robin's band. Where there's like, for the meal, 9 pennies. And then, Stuteley steps up and you see the scars on his back from the sheriff's cruelty. For this lad's back, 9 crowns. And then it kind of keeps going where, then Scathlock steps up. For the loss of my cattle, 20 shillings. And you kind of see each man of the Merry Men group suddenly stepping up and explaining, here's what the sheriff did to me. He taxed me with this. He taxed me with that. Yes, we don't see Robin personally give to a poor beggar on the street or something like that. but I still think this movie does a good job of saying, hey, the wealthy are accountable to how they've hurt the poor and how they've driven the poor into outlawry. So, yeah, I think that even though we don't get an official scene of showing Robin handing a leather bag to a poor person in rags, I think we still do get the context of Robin Hood showcasing, how the poor need to be supported and how the rich owe account to the poor for what wealth they have cost them. So in that sense, I would give this movie, frankly, a B plus.
Scale of 1 to 10.
Oh, I'm so sorry. Actually, they do that with the other podcast. So with Second Day Film Podcast, they do that with like a scale of 1 to 10, and they grade it and like, Mike, what do you say? And I'm like, always like, A minus, C plus. But for you, this is the Robin Hood podcast. I will give you a B plus.
All right.
I give it a B plus for how it showcases the poor. B plus, Disney.
Okay.
Ironically from Disney, but
so I'm more on the side of where Rick was placing things, and I really appreciate all of the nuance that you were giving it there, and I think those are excellent points. I think it is hurt by how much it focuses on the sheriff specifically. We really get, it is just Prince John and the sheriff. Oh, there's nothing really wrong with the system. The people aren't really being oppressed by the way that feudalism works. It's really just these two greedy people. And so not only do we not see a redistribution of wealth, we're also not getting a sense that there's a problem with really the world that these people are inhabiting. And what's more, when there is finally this reckoning that happens with the sheriff, when they break into his storeroom and find all of the taxes that have been accumulated, and they've gone to some length to really showcase how people have suffered under this system of taxation, how it really has drained them and left them poor. And then all of that money is suddenly in Robin Hood's hands. And then it just gets put onto the pile of money to get sent off to pay Richard's ransom. That money that we just saw people suffering for and being taken away from them is then shipped off to Austria. And it felt even a little extra egregious because it's poured onto a big table in front of a crowd of these people who had just suffered. So that scene actually kind of bothered me. In the 38 film, there's something sort of similar where there is this ransom money for Richard that is stolen by Robin and his men. And then there's even a point where Maid Marian challenges Robin, like, oh, are you just thieves? Are you just going to keep this money for yourself? And no, everybody agrees it needs to go pay the king's ransom. But that implication in that film is that was money for the ransom that the villains were then going to steal themselves. So it was money that they were basically just passing along, as opposed to this film where they stole the money that had been specifically taken from these people and then applied it to the ransom as opposed to redistribute it in some way. I did bump my rating up to a 4 as opposed to a 3 because we did have scenes like that rescuing of Will Stutely, because we did have that we're still putting our neck on the line to save somebody who's being abused by the system. And even though that's not specifically wealth redistribution, that still matters. That's still really important. So I'm going to give it a 4 overall. I thought it didn't convey the idea very well. Instead, we get the impression that the church officials and that most of the noblemen are good, righteous people looking out to protect people, the common people. And it was just, oh, the sheriff's tax people too heavily, but then we're not even going to give his taxes back to the people. No, like that didn't quite strike home to me for Robin being as good a champion of the oppressed as I would want him to be. Low points for the movie. We've said a lot of good qualities, and it did get dinged a little for the idea of robbing from the rich, giving to the poor. Again, it doesn't fall flat on its face. It's done better than other movies, that's for certain. What other kind of low points might you point to this film? Were there aspects that irked you? Mike?
I mean, obviously I've got to be a champion of this film, but I have to say, there's a lot about this film that I do admittedly find very formulaic in terms of, it does kind of feel like Disney was like, hey, how can we take the popular Errol Flynn movie, put it through a more historical refreshing, and then, equation it through the Disney formula, and what do we get? And it does kind of feel like in a lot of ways this film does that. Like, even though it doesn't really make a lot of sense, like, why in this film, if you had to ask the question, why do Robin Hood and Little John fight?
Yeah, couldn't give you an answer.
Yeah, like they fight because the legend says they fight, and that's what we're doing. Why does Robin Hood suddenly pull a knife on Little John and make him, or on Friar Tuck and make him carry him?
Yeah, there's a lot of that.
Yeah, there's just a lot of formulaic. Well, this happens in the Robin Hood stories, so we're going to do it. But it doesn't really give a lot of reasoning behind it. Not that necessarily the legend does either, but there was a different context for how people were hearing it when the legend was being told. And, this movie just kind of does it, but then it doesn't really give depth in it. So I do feel like there's some formulaic elements of this film. I also feel like that's especially true with Robin and Marion. They like each other, but there's not a lot of reasons why. And even the scene where they sing the "Whistle My Love," when they do that scene, you'll notice Robin and Marion just walking through the woods. They're just kind of walking through the woods. Like, I would have expected that scene to have more talking, like where they are just, like, oh, they haven't seen each other in such a long time. They're finally catching up. They're talking. But in the movie, they're just walking stiffly side by side. Wouldn't you just tell the actors, hey, just in the scene, pretend to be talking to each other so it looks like these characters are catching up and they're really excited to see each other after a long time? No, they're just like walking quietly, solemnly, almost. And I would say there's definitely some weakness to that. And we've also brought up some of the two-dimensional nature of Sheriff and Prince John. So I would say that the overall weakness of the film is just the fact that there's not a lot of heart in it. You can tell there's a lot of depth in the writing, but in overall the way it's done, not as much heart or character development as you would wish for, a story where people are suddenly doing very physical things to each other. Hey, I'm going to attack you with a staff on a bridge, or I'm going to pull a knife on you and make you carry me across a river. Characters should have development for these kind of choices. You don't get much with this movie. So overall, I would say it's the Disney formulaic aspect that kind of hurts it a little bit.
I can definitely agree with that assessment. There's tweaks to this movie that would have been nice. I would have really liked to have seen some of the other merry men have a little bit more personality. It is disappointing that Little John is kind of this nothing character.
Mm-hmm.
Granted, this is coming on the heels of Alan Hale, who's a great Little John. Not necessarily in his last performance of it, but yeah, I would have liked to have seen Will Scarlet get developed a little bit more, and Little John, and some of that can be chalked up to the formulaicness, of like they're not developed out; they're just doing these story beats. But even Friar Tuck, who's such a major character, we don't actually get a lot of character backstory on him or anything. We get a lot of development of his personality, and it feels very good. But yeah, the other merry men don't have even that necessarily. We don't actually get a lot of we don't get a lot of development on Marion. We know she's the daughter of this Earl the Earl of Huntingdon and everything, but she disappears for like a third of the movie and then comes back. So and I would have liked to see. We talked about how it would have been nice to see her have more agency and be a little bit more integral to the plot. She is integral to the plot, but I would have liked to have seen a little bit more of her. There's no part of this movie I hate or intensely dislike. It is an enjoyable movie. worth watching, 100%. But there's definitely parts that could be better.
So, in particular, the biggest low point I wrote down was the climax. As we mentioned before, there's no final fight scene, and that's fine. But I kind of wasn't expecting the movie to end exactly when it did. Prince John is just so unceremoniously just kind of like tossed into a jail cell, and they're just kind of wandering around the castle. There's not a lot of guards. Then there's, oh, we're escaping from the castle, but we have to be all stealthy about it. Although I kind of didn't even understand why, because there was literally just 2 guards and like 5 merry men. They could have just overpowered those guards and walked out of the castle, and it would have been fine. It managed to get a bit of tension towards the end of that scene, as we discussed, as Robin's making his way over the drawbridge. But it hadn't really felt like a good climactic story up till then, because they weren't really solving any problems at that moment other than the sheriff getting killed by the drawbridge. Like, Prince John was tossed into a dungeon cell, but the next, guard that walked by was going to let him out again. They didn't really right any wrongs in particular or fix anything. They got made Marion out of jail, but she had only been in jail for the convenience of she won't disrupt the villain's plot. There wasn't even a concept that she was going to be executed the next day or even left in jail. The stakes for that whole scene felt very weird. I didn't expect that to be the climactic scene. And then after that, they return to Sherwood Forest, and King Richard shows up in disguise, and then they just say, take off your disguise, and oh, he does, and it's King Richard. There was no point to him being there in disguise. I think that was very much like the Little John fight, as Mike was mentioning. It's just there because that's a thing that occurs in the ballads. The king arriving in Sherwood Forest in disguise. But usually something is done with that, and they just didn't. There was no motivation for Richard to do that. There was no story that was built off of him doing that. It was just kind of pointless and there. And then the movie ends. I was kind of almost taken aback that ended up being our climax. That there was so little resolution to anything that was going on with Prince John or anything even. We don't get a final scene with Richard chastising Prince John even, or a confrontation between him and Robin, just nothing. So that was my definite low point for the film. And it does tie into the same thing that Mike was saying about there being these formulaic elements and elements from the ballads. Sometimes they incorporated them very beautifully, and there are nice little touches, like I mentioned earlier with the Palmer's outfit, and Mike mentioned with the bugle that he has. But then other parts, like the fight with the sheriff, or the fight with Little John on the bridge, or the king showing up in disguise, that just felt pointless, and that it was just there because they felt it should be. I think we covered a whole lot about the film, a lot of high points, a lot of low points. I think it's a really interesting film to be out there because it is in so many ways a Robin Hood story that hits familiar beats. Prince John's our bad guy. Good King Richard's away at the Crusades. Sheriff of Nottingham is taxing people. Robin and Marion end up together. They even get ordered to get married together at the end of the film, which happens a half dozen other times in movies. So it has a lot of really familiar elements while also being very different from a lot of films too. It doesn't quite feel exactly like any of the others, even though it has so many similar qualities. And it has that element of Robin being a yeoman, which really caught me by surprise. Wasn't expecting that. And it has a lot of beautiful singing, and it has some fun moments from Friar Tuck. It has some better historicity than other adaptations. So really neat film to see while still not managing to be a great film. Final thoughts?
I enjoyed it. Go watch it. No, genuinely, it's a good film to watch. we've sat here and done our dissection of it, our vivisection of it. But I think it's overall, like, if you enjoy Robin Hood movies, and especially if you enjoy, Disney style movies from the 50s, 100% watch those. It's a fun film.
All right. Mike, what's your final rating for it?
The lesson I have of this movie is that it's a very happy story that behind the scenes was portrayed in some ways by very sad people. So enjoy this movie for the history that it actually kind of gets mostly right, for the fact that it was made in a time when history wasn't always portrayed very accurately. And enjoy the funness and the somewhat accuracy to the original legends, and the way it gets a lot of Robin Hood traditionalism in there. But behind the scenes, recognize that as art gets made, as we continue to tell Robin Hood stories, this is kind of a pure example of how a lot of the behind the scenes of what happens in Robin Hood mythology is not always great. Errol Flynn was not necessarily the best of human beings. Richard Todd, this Robin Hood, his life story was not necessarily the happiest. So as we want to continue to tell Robin Hood stories and reflect on them, let's make sure that we're starting them from a healthier place than a lot of these Hollywood narratives came from. Because I think the story matters. I think the fact that we're talking about it, hundreds of years later still matters. And if we can just find a way to maybe find healing through the story rather than just keep reflecting positivity on the outside, darkness on the inside, maybe the story can do a lot more good for the people that are not just hearing it, but portraying it. And I guess that's the message I would have for anyone who enjoys this movie, is that Disney's first Robin Hood take is not necessarily the happiest, but it's a pretty fun Robin Hood to watch, and it's worth enjoying for that sense. So cheers to this Robin Hood. I think it's one of my favorite Robin Hood movies. It's so underrated. Please watch it on Disney Plus, and I give it a B+. All
right. I think that was a very salient point, especially right now. As we're recording this, there's a lot of discussion about striking and action and legal action and union coming together of actors guilds and crew members guilds in the film theater industry, fighting for better rights, better services. We're at this weird place right now where streaming services have been able to sort of take advantage of cast and crew members by virtue of being a different model than they're used to. And we are so used to just consuming these things as entertainment. And I think you bring up a really good point that sometimes we forget about the real people that are making this entertainment for us. And they have real lives and real struggles. And especially when we're thinking about a character like Robin Hood, who is about fighting against oppression and standing up for people who need to stand up for them. It's a good time to remember these unions, good time to remember people fighting for fair wages, and think that Robin Hood would support them before popping in another DVD. The entertainment value is going to matter less to Robin Hood than doing the right thing for the people who are making the Robin Hood entertainment.
Yeah, I mean, just think about the movie that we just watched, guys. The Robin Hood we just watched was portrayed by a man whose life was like filled with suicide and fighting the Nazis. The Maid Marian we just watched was bullied on set. The Will Scarlet we just watched was a closeted gay person who didn't have rights. I mean, like, the Little John we watched in that movie, like James Robertson Justice, like, he died of multiple strokes, and he lost his 4-year-old son drowned. He had a series of affairs. Like, behind the scenes, there's a lot of darkness to these people's lives. And, if you want to tell a story about Robin Hood, which is all about exploring the darkness of human nature and corruption and greed, like, don't run away from it. And don't be afraid to deal with it in yourself first. If you like Robin Hood, that's where you should first go. Deal with the darkness in yourself. Because if anything, the lesson that we just learned from the movie we watched is that everything happy we saw on screen wasn't actually that happy in real life. And real life is where Robin Hood is supposed to work. So, yeah, good movie to think about and enjoy for what it is and enjoy for what you know. It really was.
All right. A lot to think on there. Thanks again for joining us in the Greenwood, Mike. Thanks, as always, for joining us, Rick. It's gotten quite late here, so I think it's time to sign off. I hope you all are able to get some rest and get ready to go tackle whatever Sheriffs of Nottingham you have in your lives tomorrow.
Indeed.
Take care.
Take care and take care of one another.
My thanks once again to Mike Nichols for joining us for this episode of Splitting Arrows, especially for the nuance and insight that he brought. This is certainly one of the Robin Hood films that left me with a lot more to think about, and I hope that it's given you some things to think about as well. If you'd like to share any of your thoughts, you can find us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram, all with the handle @IntoGreenwood. You can also contact us directly via intogreenwood@gmail.com. And while you're on any of those social media sites, if you want to share an episode of the podcast or recommend us to your friends, it really would mean a lot. A small, independent podcast with a niche subject like this survives based on word-of-mouth support. Although, speaking of support, even just a little bit on patreon.com/intogreenwood or ko-fi.com/intogreenwood would go a long way towards helping keep our quivers full. And because we want to follow Robin Hood's example and put some good out into the world, we do give 10% of all funds directly to the charity Trees, Water, and People. Into the Greenwood is produced and edited by me, Thaddeus Papke, and our theme music is by Plastic 3. Thank you for joining us in the Greenwood once again.
There was a lover and his lass sat 'neath a spreading oak, and lest his heart should break apart, the doting lover spoke. Come sing low, come sing high, come change thy name to mine, and you shall eat my capon pie and drink my Momsey wine.